Hi, this is Tony, and we're back on the bench. And we got another conventional classic slash restore project here today. So this is a Beachmaster 155, old school. And the reason why I say old school is because if you look carefully, this actually has the etched scene in it, the Lighthouse scene on the tailplate here. So this was the first generation of the Beachmaster, and as you can see, this reel's definitely been around the block more than a few times and kind of drug through the mud, unfortunately. So this is definitely going to be a restore project. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking this apart, and we're going to see what parts need to be cleaned and replaced. There's actually a problem where the reel is frozen here. It won't turn. The eccentric lever will not engage, and so there's definitely something going on the inside here. It looks like it has a plastic spool, from what I can tell. And outside of that, we're going to do everything we can to restore this reel to its original look and function, more or less. So we're going to start getting into it here and taking this apart. But Penn offered this reel in the early 40s. And oh man, the bearing here actually is definitely not even remotely coming loose. And so I'm going to see what I can do to take that off with a pair of needle nose here. That is very, very tight. Finally got that to loosen up a little bit. Might be replacing that bushing, but we'll see in time what we want to do there. But Penn offered this in the early 40s, and it lasted all the way up until about 2003. So the Beachmaster had a very long run, and there were some various different models of the Beachmaster, but the 155, I would say, was probably the most popular among surf fishermen, bay fishermen, boat fishermen. And in the early days of the Beachmaster, it wasn't known as the Beachmaster. It was actually known as the light tackle casting reel. Basically, that's actually what the box said was light tackle on it, or light casting. I think it said so. Eventually, it switched over to Beachmaster, I think, around sometime in the 50s, I think. So, but it's a very popular reel, relatively inexpensive for what you were getting, and you were getting quality parts, quality components and materials for a pretty decent price compared to some of the other models that are similar to this in terms of size, like the Squidder 140 or the Surfmaster 200. Those were more expensive models because they had the take-apart design and other features. But all the basics are definitely here. Now, unfortunately, you can see the damage has definitely been done in this reel here. So we've got a lot of rust damage going on here. This clicker is frozen into place here. There's nothing that's going to help that move without some attention and some work. And so what we're going to do here right out the gate is we're going to get our container out here, and we're just gonna put all these pieces and parts in here, and eventually there's gonna be some WD-40. So let's see if we can get this spool out. I wanted to take the line off of this reel, but I could not get the spool to turn at all, and this won't even come out right now. So that's definitely telling me that there's an issue there. So we're gonna oh, and you can see a frame post just came off here, and the screw is actually stuck in it, so that's a whole nother issue right there. So we're probably going to be changing out some of these frame posts and various different pieces and parts as we go. But like I said, this is a restore project because we want to make this reel as nice as it could be. I have no intention of using this particular reel. I have had other Beachmasters over the years that I have used, and I have another one that I can use if I wanted to on occasion. But this one is going to simply be a showpiece, and I've got a number of other reels that I've been working on lately that have those old school scenic tail plates. I just recently did a Coronado, and that's a very rare model for that matter. But all these scenic tailplate editions are going to be, you know, display pieces and show pieces. And you can just look at this handle right here. I mean, this is a beautiful wood grained style Bakelite handle here, you know, but you can just see the, you know, the detail of this here, these colors and stuff, this brownish, amberish, orangish colors, which you really don't see in handles that often. So we got some of our pieces and parts here coming out, and we're gonna see where we're at here with this spool. I'm not sure why it's not coming out, but there's definitely something holding it up. So we're gonna just take off all these frame posts here one by one if we can, and it doesn't surprise me that these are having a hard time coming off here. So what I like to do here is, if I can't get those to turn at all, I'm just going to take some of this CRC power lube here, and I'm just going to hit up some of these areas here with this, because it just calls for it at this point, and that's okay. It's just part of the process here, but we're going to let that kind of soak in a little bit, you know. But we're going to note, you know, the rust damage that's here on the end of the spool, you know, which is definitely not good. We've got a screw stuck in here that we might have to drill out of there, unfortunately. I don't know if I can get that out with the needle nose, but we can try. But you know, these are part of these restore projects, is dealing with this kind of stuff, and it's not an uncommon thing to run into these kinds of issues. So you know, sometimes people will say, well, you know, why bother, you know, with all the headache? And you know, you can be the judge. If you know, if you just want a reel that you can fish with, that's fine, and you can do what you can to seek out, you know, the same make and model, you know, but just a newer generation, and it's not so you know, so messed up like this particular one is. Let's see, we got one of the frame posts off there finally. Definitely give this stuff some time to sink in. Don't just rush right to it. I might actually be rushing just a little bit here, but definitely give it a minute or two to sink in just a little bit before you start attempting to break it free. I find that power lube is pretty good actually for breaking free screws. Liquid Wrench makes some good products as well. WD-40 not quite as good in terms of that penetration, I find. I like using the WD-40 for the cleaning parts. You know, like all these things, I'm definitely going to hose it down with some WD-40. But I'm just using these pliers here just to break free these frame posts here, so that we can kind of get down to the bottom of what's going on with this spool being attached here. And we might even have to take the bridge assembly all apart, but we'll see. So let's see if we can get these stand screws out here. But yeah, this is a reel that got used a lot in its day, and I think it's been sitting a lot since then. You know, probably for 50 plus years easily, maybe more, maybe 60 years or more. And you know, some of these pieces hopefully will clean up. Like I would attempt to clean this off and polish this up, and this might actually be not too bad actually. It looks very dirty. It doesn't look like it's very rusted or corroded necessarily, so that's a good thing. Very good metals and components, of course, that they made this out of. So yeah, I mean, my guess is that the spool is just fused to some of these components in here, more or less. And so, you know, we're just going to take it all apart, because we're going to do that anyway. We're going to take all our bridge screws apart here. We're going to see what we got. But yeah, I would say that this got locked up at some point, and somebody just said, well, they don't want to deal with it. They probably wound up getting another one that, you know, was brand new or something like that, if they wanted to keep using the same make and model. Things are moving, but yeah, I'd say that the shaft on the spool is probably fused, rusted onto the either the pinion gear or something in here. It's starting to kind of come out slowly, but I can definitely see some signs of rust damage and things like that in there. There's no question about it. So there we go. Finally got it undone. Yeah, so this isn't a very uncommon problem when you're running into these things. So the pinion gear rusted on to the shaft right here. It was the problem, and this is definitely stuck on there for a while. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be getting all the rest of these parts and pieces in here. Obviously, all that is going to go in there. That's going to go in there. All these things are going to go in here. I didn't actually see a dog spring in this assembly, so we might be replacing that. Oh, there it is right there. Yeah, don't forget your dog spring. Flat little piece of metal right there, and it does need to be changed out from time to time, but sometimes you can just bend it and that'll be enough. I wouldn't be surprised if this main gear had a hard time coming off, but it actually did come off quite well. And for some reason, okay, there's the fiber washer. Want to make sure you have that fiber washer. But yeah, these drags are probably leather drags, I'm guessing. Yeah, it's probably a safe assumption. They don't actually look like they're in that bad a shape, though, so that's always a good thing. Main gear looks fine. There's a little bit of rust right there and in there, but it doesn't look terrible. Got the bridge, of course, but yeah, I'm gonna take all this line off the spool, and then this is eventually going to join the rest of these pieces here, and then all this is going to get soaked in some WD-40, probably for at least a couple of hours. Really let that sink into the rust there, give it some time, and if that doesn't help free some of that up, then I'll resort to using some other products like Deep Creep or PB Blaster, even if I have to. I definitely might actually need to use some PB Blaster on this because that's fused on there pretty bad. So we're going to get to that, and then once all these pieces and parts are cleaned up, we'll get into we'll definitely do some chrome polishing and stuff like that, and I've got separate videos on chrome polishing if you want to check that out on the YouTube channel. But then when we come back, we're going to have all these things ready for reassembly and hopefully some other brand new parts that we can put into this. So we'll be back. Okay, so we're back, and it took quite a while to get all these pieces and parts cleaned up, but I think we're finally at a point where we can start reassembling. So just a few things to note. I mean, there were quite a few problems actually that I ran into here. So for starters, I'm just going to pull some of these pieces and parts out here. So I had to deal with screws that were broken or broken eventually after I got done actually removing them. That just kind of snapped off in the frame posts and whatnot. So that was one little problem. Another problem that we had is the pinion gear was rusted solid onto the spool shaft here, and as you can see, there's quite a bit of rust damage here still. I wanted to leave that on there just so that you could see the amount of rust buildup that's on there, and we'll clean that off with a little bit of steel wool in just a moment. Another problem that I ran into is our clicker spring was originally riveted in, and as you can see now, it's no longer riveted in. I actually resorted to using some Gorilla Glue, which I normally would not do, but I had to find a way to get this screw in that hole in opposed to a rivet. And due to the age of this tail plate, it's so old and so dated that I would not want to even attempt to try to rivet it because it would more than likely crack. So that's the end result. But the good news is that we got our clicker freed up and it's moving back and forth now, whereas before it was not. I really had to use a lot of penetrating oil on this. I used a few different kinds actually, from PB Blaster to Power Lube to Liquid Rinse, just to kind of free up all the rust buildup that was underneath that clicker tongue right there. So that was a pretty ample amount of work right there actually. But outside of that, most of these pieces and parts cleaned up pretty nicely. The only other things to note, I would say, are primarily right here. These pieces got these grooves in them here, the eccentric jack and the pinion yoke, and the pinion yoke it's pretty obvious. It is that, you know, the pinion gear got stuck on that spool and it just kind of grinded on here for a long time. I'm not 100% sure how this scar came to be there exactly, but it is a pretty nasty scar. Now, if this was a reel that we were going to actually use out on the water, I would just replace these pieces right out the gate. This is a showpiece reel. This is not going to be probably ever used again on the water, more than likely, or at least not by me, being that it's part of my vintage collections. But you know, we're just going to run with this. We've cleaned up most of these things the best that we can. The other thing to note is these rings and chromed pieces. Now, this is actually German silver, I'm pretty certain, which is the older generation metal that Penn used on most of their reels. And as you can see, I mean, it's very nice metal actually, even though it is scratched and scarred, but it cleaned up fairly nicely considering its age. So, you know, we're just going to use those pieces. I don't think we're going to change out any of those things, because the goal in a restore project like this is for authenticity, and we want to keep all these pieces and parts as authentic as possible. So, having said that, we're going to get back into the beginnings of the reassembly, but one thing that we're going to do right here is we're going to take our bridge shaft off and we're going to clean that up real good as part of the standard service that we do. And I just like to take this little hole punch here and make it so that you can work your pin out of the shaft here, or the sleeve I should say. I normally find you can push it out like that, just get it to stick out just a tiny little hair, and then you should be able to take a pair of needle nose and pull that out eventually. In theory, sometimes you got to work at it. And in this case, you got to work at it. So sometimes I will put this in a vise and I'll just give it a tap with a hammer, but if I can get this to stick out enough, we should be able to get it to come out like so. Just pull it out like that. And then take our sleeve off, and we're just going to clean this up here the best that we can, because we want all these pieces to mesh and be as clean as possible and get all those old contaminants out of the way and off the reel completely. And I like to take the Q-tip, of course, to the inside of the sleeve. And I'd say all in all, considering the age of this reel, these parts don't really look that bad. But as you can see, there's quite a bit of grease buildup in there, which is definitely something that should be addressed to help the working flow of the reel and whatnot. Now, I have been using a lot of 4.0 steel wool on this project, between the chrome pieces and some of the rusted pieces and all that, so I like to take that 4.0 steel wool to this. But you definitely want the finest steel wool that you can find, which is the 4.0 pretty much. You don't want to use the heavier ones because they'll scar the metal, so I just recommend staying away from those. And then I'm just gonna try to clean up this bridge a little bit more, make it a little shinier if we can. There's always going to be tarnish and stuff like that, but you just want to get these surfaces clean and smooth as possible. Okay, so now we're pretty much ready to lube our shaft back up here, our bridge shaft, and so we're just going to use a little bit of blue grease on that. I've used lubes, just regular Penn lube. I've used oils. They all work fine. It's kind of your preference as long as it's designed for fishing reels. I think that's the most important part. I'm going to use the blue grease this time on this one. I do have a tendency to like using the little tubes of Penn lube there. I find that the viscosity is a little nicer sometimes, but I don't have a lot of that on hand at the moment. So, and that's not the kind of thing that you can buy, so to speak, anymore. So I'm just going to put our pin back into place like so. You should be able to give it a tap with the hammer. You want to make sure that you clear the surface so that you can get your main gear back on. So we've got our fiber washer, which cleaned up quite nicely actually. There's really nothing wrong with that fiber washer, so we're just going to run with that and keep using it. And then our main gear. There's a little bit of rust on this main gear, a little bit on the inside, but all in all, it's really not too bad. So we're gonna keep using it. And once again, being that it's a showpiece, we're just gonna kind of keep that in mind as we're doing this. Okay, so now we've got our drag washer set. And these are the leather washers, but it looks like they'll hold up okay, so I'm just going to put them in there. Again, if this was a reel that was going out for service and actually getting used, I would not be doing that. So we're just going to go in sequence, and so it should be leather washer, metal washer, leather washer, keyed washer, leather washer, metal washer, and then our spring washer on top. And so we're just going to put those back in. We're not going to apply any universal star drag grease because these are leather washers. They're not really designed for that. But if we were doing a standard HT100 kit, I would definitely encourage using that star drag grease. I'm just going to gently put these on real carefully so that we don't break them. And this one is having a little bit of trouble already, I can tell. Just want to gently get it on there. Keyed washer. But as with most vintage Penn reels, this is a standard set in terms of all these washers and the sequence that they go in. Standard for most of their conventional models, I'd say. Okay, so that's our bridge assembly with the main gear, drag kit reinstalled. So now, while we're here, we're just going to take a little bit of blue grease to that main gear, and we're just going to give that a little dab of our blue grease. Like so. We don't need to get carried away, just enough to make it spin nicely. Okay, so we're going to put that off to the side now. Now we're going to finish our handle side. So there was a lot of cleanup work to do in here too. And being that pinion gear was fused to the spool shaft, and there was just a lot of built up gunk and sand and dirt in here. But the plate actually cleaned up quite nicely, all things considered. So I'm pretty happy about that. So right out the gate, we're going to get with the blue grease here on our eccentric roller and spring right here, because these are all moving parts, and then we're definitely going to hit up our bushing in there. And it'll be interesting to see how well this spins once we get all this back together. But being that we're not going to replace any of those parts, we're just gonna roll with what we got. So we got our 2 pinion yoke springs, and then we got our pinion yoke, our pinion gear, and we're going to take some blue grease to this. And again, this was scarred quite badly, and that's a result of a couple of different things. One, it's mechanical error because that pinion gear was seized and locked up, but perhaps that pinion gear got seized and locked up because this reel was not maintained properly, which is more than likely the case. So it just kind of goes to show you that doing your standard reel maintenance is key, and with a little bit of work, a little bit of attention, it'll last you a lifetime, if not more, and a lot of fishing. We're just going to get some blue grease here on our pinion gear, like so. We're going to set our pinion gear in place over our yoke springs. And we have our eccentric jack that we're going to snap into place on top of that, like so. And then this is the part where you need to push down on the two springs on the pinion gear, basically, with your thumb, and then turn your main gear assembly upside down on the bridge and insert it into place and roll the bridge so that you can keep tension on top of that pinion gear, like so. And this can be kind of tricky sometimes. Just need to get this pinion gear so it'll sink all the way down. So we've got our dog and our dog spring, this thin piece of metal here, and we need to put those into place as well as our bridge screws here. So what I'm going to do right out the gate while we're doing this is we're going to apply a little bead of oil to these threads. Just a little bead, doesn't have to be much. Put our dog in place, like so. And we're going to take one of the fully threaded screws and come up from underneath. Have it so that it's flush. And then take our dog spring. And then you have to lay it flat on top of the dog. And then you have to kind of curl it around and bend it. And these dog springs do wear out. This one doesn't look like it's in too bad a shape, but that's ultimately what you should end up with. And then at this point, you need to roll that bridge all the way back around, like so. And once you hear that snap, that usually means that it's in place. But you need to keep your finger on that screw head underneath before it gets away from you. And then we take our screwdriver and we get that one started, at least a couple of turns. I would not snug it up just yet, but I would leave it in there just enough so that you can turn this and verify that it's working okay, which it is. And so we're going to go with another screw and get that into position. So, and that dog sounds real healthy, really strong, so that's a good deal. We're going to take our partially threaded screws and put those into the top positions like so. But so far I think this reel is cleaned up quite nicely considering the condition that it was in. And it'll be nice to see it functioning properly again, I think. So remember, you don't want to over tighten these, you just want snug, not over tightened, because you don't want to break and crack the plate. And sometimes I just make it a habit to check. Every once in a while, just check my screws out and make sure that they're snug, just to make sure. Okay, so that's moving real nice. And we're just going to take a little bit more blue grease here to the eccentric jack into these positions and over the pinion gear right here. Just get a little bit of grease in those areas there, just to help the functionality. And I'd say that's feeling pretty good, actually. So we're gonna run with that, and we'll push forward. So now we're ready to basically apply our ring, our German silver ring, onto this side, like so. And then we've got our base, our stand mount, and our frame posts here. We're going to get all those into position. Start with the stand. And note, we've got 2 shorter screws just for that purpose here, and then we've got 3 longer screws right here. And we're going to do the same drill, and we're going to do our bead of oil on these. You can use just about any kind of oil that you want on the threads, but I just happen to use the Penn oil. I would still recommend using real oil of some kind, because it's designed to withstand the elements of the fishing elements, like the salt sprays and all that stuff. But when need be, you can always resort to 3-in-1 oil if that's all that you got. Just for the threads, not for other things though. I wouldn't recommend that. Okay, so we got our stand in place, and then we're just going to get our frame posts in place. It just dawned on me that that screw had broken and I need to find a replacement for it still. So we're going to try to dig that out here and see what we can find for that. That's close. Not quite right. Dig around here real quick and see if we can't come up with the proper screw for that. But this is what happens working on these old reels, is you run into these problems where you've got rust damage and you're trying to piece the reel back together with the right parts. I think we might have to settle for one slightly shorter, which we can live with, but we would prefer not in most circumstances. But I think that's just the way it's going to be, because I've got a longer one. Actually, I think that is the right one right there. I think we'll take that. Okay. And that just shows you that every once in a while it does pay off to save your pieces and parts off of other reels. So try that one out. You should be able to just spin these on like so, frame posts. But I find that bead of oil really does go a long way with those threads, so I highly recommend doing that. Yeah, and these German silver pieces, they came out pretty good, all things considered. I mean, there's still a lot of corrosion, unfortunately, a lot of pitting damage, but we're just going to stick with it. Again, the authenticity in this case is more important than actually making it like a cherried out piece, because we want those authentic pieces attached to the reel still to give it its proper value if you're a collector. But if your goal is just to make it as clean and as pristine as could be, you can definitely change them out. These parts for the 155 are not that hard to come by still, but they're not going to be this German silver, more than likely, unless you find a parts reel or something to that effect. Okay, so now we're just going to hit up a bead of oil on these threads here, like so. Get that ready. And then we've got our tail plate, our non-handle side with the seam. And this was pretty dirty. I actually took some simple green to this a couple of times, and that steel wool, that 4.0 steel wool, and kind of cleaned off some of the bake, the salt bake, as I would call it, on there. It was pretty heavy, pretty thick. But as you can see, I mean, this is a really pretty scene, and this was typical. This was a typical scene for this model, and also for the 180, I believe, the Beachmaster in that time. This particular Lighthouse scene. Okay, so we got that ready. I've already greased up this clicker pretty well with our blue grease, and so we shouldn't need too much more of that. I'll probably just put one more little dab on there just for grins, just so it's there, but we shouldn't need much more than that. And before I forget, we're also going to clean off our rust on our spool shaft here, because this was pretty heavily rusted, and we definitely want to clean that off. Make sure that this gets properly lubed and whatnot. There's a pretty ample amount of rust on the clicker side too. Okay, so now we're just going to apply our blue grease to our shaft on both sides, here on the clicker side and the handle side. Do a little bit on the clicker teeth here as well, like so. Okay, we'll put our spool into position. And the good thing about this is that it still has the plastic spool, which is rare and kind of hard to come by. So okay, so we'll get our non-handle side ready to be put into position, like so. Line up our holes. Get our two shorter screws down here at the bottom. But I will say the Beachmaster is a great tool to have in the workbox, if I haven't already said that. And it's you know, I've had 2 or 3 of them actually over the years, and they're just a really nice basic reel. But it's a wider reel, so it's great for casting, great for surf casting or bank fishing or pier fishing, anything that involves casting, basically. You can use it on the boat. And the Beachmaster had a pretty long run in its production, so it's still quite a popular model amongst saltwater fishermen, I'd say. Just going to get all these threaded and then get them cinched up here. And some of these screws are a little on the dirty side, but not too bad. Okay. So I like to just kind of go back and forth and start here and then balance it out on this side over here. Again, not too tight, just snug. Okay. Okay. So we've got our bushing, handle side bushing. I'll just put a little bit of blue grease on there. So now we'll put our sleeve in, our handle sleeve, like so. And then I like to just do a little tiny bead of oil right here on the threads. Just a little tiny bit, not too much, because you don't want a bunch of oil to ooze down into your drag set down there, but you just want enough to grab those threads basically. So we'll put our star washer back in place. Make sure it's all the way down. Get our handle back on. This is becoming a more rare torpedo style handle to find these days for this reel. So I'll just do a tiny little bead of oil on this handle nut here. It's the tiniest bit. I'll snap that back into place like so. Just do a tiny bead here for our security screw, as we would call it. Okay, let's try it out and see how it feels. Well, it's a lot better than it was, that's for sure. It's spinning real nicely. Let's try our drag out and actually see how that's holding. It's definitely holding, that's for sure. Loosen that back up. And then let's try out our free spool. It's kind of hard to see on the camera, but it's definitely free spooling pretty smoothly now compared to how it was before, so that's good. Might need to tighten this up just a little bit on this side. That's better. Try out our clicker. Clicker sounds really nice and healthy again, which is great. So there you have it. That's the Beachmaster Model 155. All cleaned up and ready to display. So, thanks again for watching. This is Tony with Back on the Bench. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more, please subscribe. We'll see you next time.